server. We can't just use the text editor and the browser like we have for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and jQuery. So if you haven't set up your free web hosting yet, then jump to the web hosting setup section and go through the process to do that. All done? Great. Okay. So now you should be able to go to Fire FTP and to connect to your website and connect to your website. And that's what I've done here. So I'm on completewebdevelopercourse.com/content. There's my previous sections. This is our new section. So I'm going to create a directory and we'll call this 6-PHP. So our next section, missing out WordPress because we didn't save anything on this section for that. And then I'm going to double click to go into 6-PHP. And then I'm going to create a file and I'm going to call this index.php. So remember the .php extension means that we'll be able to run PHP scripts on this file. If we had .html, then it won't recognize the PHP by default. And I'll show you in a minute why we use index.php rather than any other name. There's a particular advantage to using that file name. So then I'm going to right click or control click and open, and that will open up index.php in brackets. It should open up in your chosen text editor if you've set that up as instructed in the hosting setup section. All right, so just to check that everything's connected and working, I'm going to have just a simple, not quite a hello world, we're not there yet, but just some text. And then I'm going to go over in my browser and open that up. So remember, this was completewebdevelopercourse.com/6-PHP and then index.php. So if we jump to there, we should get hi there. Fantastic. Now's the time to show you why this index.php file is a good file name. And that's if we get rid of the file name completely and reload that, you can see we still get that content. And that's because the index file name by default displays if there's no file name at all. So if you want your website to display at completewebdevelopercourse.com/blog, for example, then if you called your main file index.php, then that would just work. It works as well for index.html. So generally, the main page or the home page of your site will be called index.php or HTML if you're not using PHP. So that's why we use index.php. You can, of course, use a different file name if you like, but we'll stick with our index. And now then, it's time to run our first bit of PHP. So remember, with JavaScript, we had to use the script tag with a type of text/JavaScript, and then inside our script tags was where we put all our JavaScript. So this was an indication that we were going to start some JavaScript. We have a similar setup for PHP, but instead of using script tags, we use the less than symbol, and then a question mark, and then PHP. And that's the universal symbol for, right, we're going to start writing some PHP code now. And then when we're done writing our PHP code, we use a question mark and a greater than sign. So this means start PHP, and this means end PHP. One of the most common mistakes I see early programmers making is putting text or HTML inside these PHP tags, and that won't work. So you need to put your HTML outside of those tags, not inside them. Okay, so how do we get hello world to appear in PHP? Of course, if we try and do something like that, that's not valid PHP. So we'll get a nasty error of some sort, a 500 error in this case. Or occasionally, if you've got an error, the script just won't run and you'll get a blank page. So if we want to display hello world, we have to give the PHP code an instruction to print it. And the function for that in PHP is echo. So echo essentially means display on the page. You could imagine it being an echoing from the script to the user's page. And then we put the thing that we want to echo in quotes like that. And unlike JavaScript, PHP insists on semicolons. So if you don't put a semicolon at the end of your line, it won't run. So you have to put semicolons. That then is your first line of valid PHP. Let's just have a look. Excellent. There we go. So that's your hello world in PHP. And essentially anytime you want to display some HTML or text using PHP, you use echo and then surround what you want to display in quotes. All right, so we're now going to go on and look at the key programming constructs in PHP, starting with variables. But just before we do that, I'm going to show you one very important thing when you're learning PHP, and that's how to display error messages. So if, for example, I forget the double quote at the end of hello world, and we try to run the script, we'll get a server error. So just like with JavaScript, it won't run the code at all. If you've got a big bunch of code, it can then be quite tricky to work out the error is. And to do that, we have to create a new file. So go back to Fire FTP and then Control or right click and create file. And this new file is going to be called php.ini. So it's a slightly different kind of file. It's not a PHP file, it's an ini file. So essentially it contains the initialization options for PHP. So when PHP runs your script, we can put various options in the php.ini file. And then we open that up in the usual way. And we want to set two variables here. The first one is error underscore reporting. And we want to set that equal to e underscore all. And that essentially says we want to report on all types of errors. And we don't put a semicolon at the end of the line here because we're not writing normal PHP, we're writing .ini code, which doesn't require the semicolon. Then the other variable we want to set is display underscore errors, and we want to set that equal to on. So those two variables combined will allow us to see the errors on our script when we run it. I should say that although it's a very good idea to display errors when you're developing a site, it's a very bad idea to display errors on a site which is being used in production. Because if something goes wrong on your site, hackers might be able to use the error messages to get access to your database or your file system or something secure. So feel free to turn errors on while you're developing, but then remember to turn them off again when your site is done and it's out in the wild. Okay, so we don't need to edit that anymore. So I'm just going to close that down. And then let's put an error into our code and see what happens now. Lovely. So it doesn't look beautiful, but it's definitely better than the 500 error that we had before. And it's actually reasonably precise. We've got a parse error, so the script was unable to be parsed, that is, understood by the computer. And we've got a syntax error, unexpected end of file, expected variable, or this or that on line 6. Often this message, won't be particularly useful. Sometimes it will, but it's really useful is the line number. Although it's not quite as useful as you might think, because you might be slightly confused here. It says the error is on line 6, which is here, but we can clearly see the error is on line 3. Now the reason it's coming up with the error on line 6 is because we haven't actually got an error as yet here, because what we could do is close the quotes down there, and if we did that, everything would be fine. Let's have a look. You see we just get the semicolon as part of our code which is echoed. So the error doesn't actually appear until we try and end PHP, which we do on line 6, and it says, wait a minute, we can't end PHP because we haven't closed this quote here. So don't necessarily spend ages scouring the particular line that the compiler gives you the error message on, because it might be that the error is on the line before that line, or maybe even one or two lines before that line, depending on how your code is set up. So that's a bit of a warning for you, but generally a message like this is going to be much more useful than the just plain 500 error as we saw beforehand. So I definitely recommend setting up error reporting as you're developing your site, and definitely as you're learning PHP as well, because it'll help you with the challenges. And you inevitably make mistakes. It will show you, at least reasonably accurately, where you've gone wrong. Alright, so now we're set up and running with PHP, showing us nice error messages. We're now going to work our way through the basic programming constructs in PHP, starting in the next video with variables.